spreading. You can say that it's COVID-19, that the virus this year I'm trending. Let me just kill this track, spill these facts and I'm on to the next thing. But let's take this thing serious, please stay safe and don't get infected. Love to the families who've been affected. Spreading. You can say that it's COVID-19, that the virus this year I'm trending.
Mate, how many times have you been out of the house in this last week?
I would say prior to about Friday, I wasn't switched on to what I would now call the correct degree.
Yeah.
So until Friday, I was going out and living my usual life. But then I think when it hit that point is when I stopped. And since Friday, I've probably only been out for essentials.
Yeah. When the corona anxiety set in.
Yeah. The corona anxiety.
Is that what we're calling it?
That was. I think what we can coin it is when you really begin to grasp what's upon us. I think that's corona anxiety.
Yeah, and that's something that we really wanted to get stuck into today. Firstly, the country's in need of some good news and something to bring the people together. Brexit couldn't be it, so Pranav and I have decided to be the remedy.
Reunite.
And after months away, Spicy Takes returns. It's good to be back, isn't it? How are we?
It's good to be back. We had a busy period, but we're back. And
yeah, I know. People have been asking me on the bus when the next pod's going to be.
Yeah, look, there's been multiple inquiries, but look, we're back now, and with this new format, there are unlimited possibilities. Really, this is a sustainable format.
Yeah,
no contact whatsoever.
Yeah,
no contact whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. And for kind of eagle-eyed viewers, they'll realise that I am not drinking the the classic red stripe that normally appears on the podcast, whereas Pranav has stayed true to his roots. But
I mean, I don't think there's been a greater betrayal since Adam and Eve.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the Brexit betrayal, mate. Don't forget that.
Maybe,
but
slightly comparable.
Bloody Mrs. May. But I think, before we wanted to get stuck into the pod today, the first thing we wanted to kind of just touch on briefly was what we're going to get stuck into. So firstly, we're going to talk a little bit about the science, but, no disclaimers here. We're not scientists. We're not epidemiologists. This is the thing I've noticed as well. Loads of people have said on Twitter, you see it all the time, oh, I'm not an epidemiologist. And then they go and give their whole spiel about what they think about flattening the curve. I find it so strange. It's like a week ago, you thought flattening the curve was some sort of diet routine. And now suddenly you're thinking that you're some sort of epidemiologist. I was thinking of a famous one. I couldn't get in my head.
I guess it's not Neil Ferguson. That's what I know. Well, I mean, look, we all, I guess there is this sort of natural drive towards understanding the most you can about this situation, but we all have to preface that we don't know as much. We haven't studied a master's or a PhD in this, and we can only trust what we read.
So what we're going to get stuck into is sort of how we got here to the position that we're in, kind of mentally as students in particular, and then we're going to touch on the welfare aspects of it, how we can really kind of come to terms with the fact that our life might be turned upside down for the next few months in the foreseeable future, and how we deal with that. Then what we're going to do, we suddenly got, our exams look like they're on the back burner. Summer plans seem to be derailed. We've got a lot of time on our hands, and it's obviously within a limited capacity. So we need to understand what we're going to get up to there. And then finally, we just want to ask, how are we going to really persuade people to make sure that they look after themselves, to make sure that they stay isolated for as long as possible, to really kind of bring the gravity of the situation to people's minds? Because I'm sure, as young people, you'll have seen on people's Instagram stories, people are still going clubbing, like as recently as last weekend. And, I think
reckless behavior,
in my opinion, is a recipe for disaster. What do you think, Frank?
Yeah. No, it's actually reckless behavior. I mean, look, you have to assume that with the same level of knowledge, everyone would be making similar decisions. But look, this has been in the news for a number of weeks. We've seen it developing from China. From about when, like middle February? When was this coming? It was end of January. It really became something serious in China. And look, by this time, everyone should have done the required reading. You should have seen what's happening in Italy. You should see how this new virus has the ability to take over a healthcare system, to completely become overwhelming due to the requirements on ICU units. So look, we all, I believe, have an obligation, but but look, it's difficult to get that across to people so quickly because it requires a big change in lifestyle, and that's something obviously we can accept.
Yeah, and we're going to leave some sort of references and resources in the sort of comment section and in the description, just for people to get a better grasp of the kinds of things we're talking about in a much clearer, more qualified detail than what we are kind of proposing. But like, who are the main people that we should be looking at, Pran, do you reckon, in particular, as resources, people to draw on?
So I've seen, well, clearly, I think the first one, you got to look at our world and data doing their usual great work. God's work, honestly. I mean, they've got this page, this interactive page that you really just scroll down. And you can't stop learning. So everything from fatality rates to, the rate of spread you can learn on this page, and the newest sort of the newest sort of academic research coming out. So, but then there's also a number of people on Twitter that I imagine you've been following. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, our world and data are based out of Oxford University, and they collate some fantastic data sets across real important trends. It's not just coronavirus, but that's been where they've been focusing recently. The sort of big hitters that I would be looking at the moment are an organization called 80,000 Hours. They're trying to do research onto how you can make the most impact in your career. And one of the things they encourage people to do is actually explore a career in fighting kind of global catastrophic risk via disease. So they've been banging on about this for years. So they've got a real sort of backlog of information there as well. So there'd be people that I'd suggest. There's obviously like various reports that can be disputed, but I think one of the ones that the government's finally started to draw upon is the Imperial College London one. I'm not sure if you want to kind of dip into that very, very briefly.
So it seems like that's a study out from Neil Ferguson, who's I think part of the team that Sir Patrick Vallance, who's the chief scientific advisor. He constitutes part of that of Vallance, Sir Patrick Vallance's team, who was obviously the scientific advisor.
I invited Sir Patrick Vallance for TED, last year.
Did you actually?
And
wow.
he's gonna cut. He said he'd come next year, but I emailed him in like September, and he was like, "Oh, I started the job a month ago. I'll probably be quite busy." So imagine if he said yes, and then he'd had like this whole thing on the back burner at the same time.
I'm pretty sure he would have declined at that point, wouldn't he?
Well, yeah, I mean, I could have pointed out some flaws in his script, and maybe he wouldn't have been talking about herd immunity so much. But...
Well, you never know, Tom.
Yeah. Anyway, ICL.
anyway, there's too much. It's too much. But no, anyway. So it seems like that was one of the key studies that informed the change of tact that came from the government on, I think, Monday after the weekend, where we went from what seems to be some sort of a mitigation approach where we simply tell people to refrain from certain things to a full-on avoid leaving your house for non-essential and work from home if possible, those sort of things. So that sort of catalyzed that response. At least that's what it seems like. But who else have you found, Tom? Have you got the ones?
Well, I mean, I think that those are the main ones, to be honest. But I reckon we should just sort of move on to the idea of sort of how we got to the position we are in. I mean, so both Pran and I were supposed to be going to a house party on Friday. We were supposed to be going out to clubs, but a few days before, I decided, for example, that it probably wasn't best to go out to these social occasions. I'd seen what had been boiling over in Italy and on much of the continent, and was really, really concerned. But something that we've found is, how slow the population has been, and in particular students as well, to really responding to the unfolding crisis that we've been seeing. And there's this real kind of, I don't know what you think, Pran, about how we see something happening in another country and we think that couldn't happen to us.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre that we don't think that, particularly when it's on our continent. When it's in Europe, I can kind of understand when it's on, a country that's very different in terms of the infrastructure that's set up, the kinds of like living conditions and kind of the way that the state is organized there. But when it starts boiling over in places like Italy, France, and Spain, and Brits are still going out, it absolutely baffled me.
It is baffling. I mean, and it's not just. I mean, you mentioned that it's not a social infrastructure system too dissimilar to ours, but this is the richest region of Italy as well. I mean, it's Lombardy, it's the northern kind of powerhouse of Italy, and you'd expect the healthcare to be of a higher quality in that region, and still that's where they were overwhelmed. And despite seeing this and hearing this on the news, I guess it does just seem far removed to our own situation. We just seem, we seem sort of, the British is best, sort of, it will be fine. You seem to have this sort of bias towards the positive, like regardless if it's there, it's not going to be here. It won't affect the elderly people in my life or my family and friends. It's very difficult to grasp that idea. And I confess, I didn't grasp that idea really straight away, even though I was following it from when it started spreading in China in around late January, February. I felt it was just like a trend I could watch. It was something that wasn't really impacting the lives of those around me. And maybe that's a selfish point of view, and I do understand that. But even when, I think you told me on Wednesday, the house party was on the Friday, you told me on Wednesday that I'm questioning not going to the party, and I sort of dismissed it. I was like, that's a bit much, Tom. Like, there's no need for that. But then Friday came around, and
I just know the logarithm's better than you, mate. That's all.
Yeah, honestly, those exponential curves. You understand. You have to understand.
Yeah.
But no, and then I think so. What really changed it for me was hearing it from the perspective of Federico, someone who's already been on the show. He's in Italy,
fan of the podcast,
long-time fan. But I mean, after hearing his sort of perspective on the matter, hearing how it's affected his family, I mean, the spread right now, I'm not sure where it is at Italy right now. It's around 25k or so. I mean, I know they've enacted huge social distancing, but when it was around 20k, I mean, he has two family friends who've died from it. Mm-hmm. He has one of his best friend, her dad has the virus, mm-hmm. and you see that, look, probabilities are small. The chances of us currently having this are very small, but with the exponential the exponential growth, and with the number of friends and acquaintances we have in our lives, the chances that one of us or ourselves or someone we're close to or someone we know will be infected by this is pretty bloody decent. And once you start realizing that, you can't react in any other way than to mount this sort of moral obligation on yourself.
I mean, so I was just going to say, there are these sort of there are two initial stages of denial, I feel. There's the first, the ignorance, it won't happen to us. Then there's the sort of acknowledgement, at least, that it could happen, but young people won't be affected by it massively. We've heard this again and again as young students. I mean, we're students, and this is the thing, we're in a flat with lots of other students. We're in a student community at Warwick University, and there's this real kind of ignorance of the fact that, we'll be all right. It'll just be a sort of, it'll pass in the space of a week or so, and then we'll be fine. And that sort of baffles me because, we are in a very interconnected world, not just spiritually, but physically as well. And we're so easily able to pass that on to other people. And I'd like to think now we're at the third stage, which is the realization. My one fear is that was probably too late, because it takes at least a couple of weeks for it to get really bad. It takes a couple of weeks for people to start getting symptoms bad enough that they need to use the facilities like ICU beds and ventilators and all the rest of it. So once we realize it's really bad, there's 2 weeks of growth still going
of lag
before we can get a handle on it. So this lag time is really important, and something that makes every day count. Every day is really important. The sooner we realize, the better. And was there a moment, so what was the moment that you realized? You said it was talking to Federico. That was it.
It was definitely talking to, it was literally, I mean, it was only a 40-minute chat, but I mean, I caught and then he picked up, and you sort of, if you look on Twitter, I mean, you're almost engulfed in memes regarding the situation, and so you kind of take this mindset that humor is the best way to cope with these things. And I'm still not completely closed off from that mindset. I'm not against that, but then having this 30-minute conversation, just hearing the actual personal impact it has on people's lives within the country, no matter of class or of really where you are or what your occupation is. This thing is an invisible killer that will spread if you do not take it seriously. It for what it sounds like, it debilitates the respiratory system, and regardless of if you're over 50 or even under it, it can have real problems. I think that's kind of illustrated by, I believe you were saying that, I think I heard from Fed that in the Netherlands healthcare system, the people in critical condition it's either critical condition or in ICUs, 50% are below 50. Even though the fatality rate you see is quite low for those people, it's still they're impacted quite strongly by this. And so just hearing that sort of perspective, I think it just made me dawn on me, like, if it's unessential, you cannot be leaving their house, because no matter if you don't have elderly people in your life, if you go out and say, God forbid, you're carrying the virus and it's not affecting you because you're asymptomatic, or it's mild symptoms and you're not going to be affected because you're a youngster and you're healthy, you could give that to someone who does have elderly people in life, or God forbid, another elderly person. And that the possibilities are literally limitless. Mm-hmm. Everywhere you go, you're surrounded by people, and really we don't have a great understanding of how we try. We can understand if it's coughing, sneezing, touching things after touching after the fluids that are leaving you, but we don't have a great grasp of how we can spread this thing, and therefore we really need to limit our transmission. I mean, that's kind of the conclusion I came to. Is that I assume it's similar for you as well.
No, absolutely. I just want to touch on something and moving on to the sort of welfare aspect of this. And you briefly alluded to Twitter as a kind of means to absorb information. And one of the things I think most people will agree with is that you're at home, you're therefore online quite a lot, getting a lot of your information. It's a pretty overwhelming experience. Anyone if you're following the right people on Twitter, if you're on the news, like on the BBC or anything, coronavirus has now got its own tab on most big online publications. And I think it's dawning on us that there's this brand new change that we're going to have to do with our lifestyle. We're going to have to adapt very, very quickly to the new surroundings that we find ourselves in. And I think there's this real anxiety setting in, the corona anxiety this neologism that we're coining. Honestly, you heard it here first for people listening. And, one thing I wanted to kind of get at, and I think students should really think about, is like, how are we going to rationalize this new change in lifestyle? Is there anything that you think is a really good way of dealing with it and approaching this transformative, series of events that are unfolding?
Yeah. I think, like with anything, you have to think. I mean, look, different people's minds will work in different ways, and so we have to account for that. But from a personal point of view, I look at it and I think, look, if you're not a healthcare worker or you're not one of the epidemiologists trying to work on this, realistically, you have very little impact on what's going on, or what's unfolding on the decisions other people make, other than the people in your life that you can urge to make changes. So you have very little impact on the sort of domestic or the global spread of this virus. So what can you do, really? If you cannot impact the sort of awful situation that's unfolding in front of you, what can you do? You can only try and do the best you can, i.e. urge the people in your life to change their behaviour. And on a more personal note, noting all the time we have in our own houses, it's about grasping, taking the time off from exams or from lectures to sort of take in new things, take in the knowledge, either reading about coronavirus or starting a new project, reading a new book, starting a new podcast.
No, we don't want to be saturating the market, mate. We need.
No, I don't mean starting a new podcast. I mean starting listening to a new podcast. No.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You can start listening to new podcasts, but it has to be Spicy Takes. It can't be anything else, right?
Exactly.
There's plenty of podcasts I'd recommend.
But what about you? How have you tried to?
Well, I mean, just kind of like riffing off that, if you like. I mean, what you've kind of advocated there is quite a sort of stoic approach, which, just to kind of unpack that, what that means is one of the central things that underpins stoicism is thinking about what actions are within your control. Because there's so much external events and stimuli occurring within our lives that can really kind of wear us down and stress us out. But what stoicism tells us is that, right, there's all that going on, but if you realize that actually a lot of this you can't really change, but there is some things you can change. You can change, like, how you contact with people, like the way in which you work, these particular things. And then suddenly, if you realize about the sort of scope of action that you have, it can be quite a good way of dealing with that. And it's almost quite liberating to understand that actually maybe there's not an awful lot you can necessarily do. That doesn't mean go off and kind of have a sort of Ricky Gervais in Afterlife approach where you just like do whatever you want, basically, because you kind of have an effect. But at the sort of big macro level, you know, we're not all Bill Gates. As you're saying, we're not all Boris Johnson, thank God. So, I mean, no, I mean, I wouldn't want his job. Like,
right now, I definitely don't want a job.
No. Right now, big question. No. Yeah, in an easier time, but
maybe.
But yeah, I mean, there's that. There's another thing I think quickly to tap onto, and this is something that I think we're all guilty. No, guilty is the wrong word because I think it's absolutely right. But this isn't an existential risk. Something that I care about a lot is the idea of ensuring that we have, you know, humanity stretching out into thousands of years into the future. I think we should try and prioritize the long-term future of humanity and protecting that as much as possible. And one of the ways that humanity could potentially destroy itself is through biologically engineered pandemics. So actually, this isn't going to be as bad as, for example, anything like, you know, the Black Death or the Spanish flu. It's going to be bad. It's going to damage a lot of lives. It's going to kill a lot of people, really, unfortunately. But I think ultimately this is a moment for reflection and study. You know, because, you know, civilization isn't going to collapse around us. It's a chance to work out, how do we cope with the next big pandemic that comes along? How do we make sure that the infrastructure and the protocols are in place so that when something like this comes along, we lose less lives and we do a better job at making sure that we can keep moving forward? And that's really important. And something that I think we'll all admit to is this is fascinating. I don't know what you think, but I can't take my eyes off it. And I think most people that are interested in sort of like science and social trends and society can't take their eyes off it from a sort of just from our gaze, from a pure position of fascination with the world and with microbiology.
Yeah, I think if from a sort of behavioral economics point of view, the idea of when the state in a sort of liberal democracy such as the UK,
this is
when the state tells its people that when this is completely unprecedented, to no longer leave their homes for unessential activities. I mean, it's a great case study for, do people listen? I mean, do people trust the state to give them advice? Do people even have access to the information and therefore perceive it in the most important way? I mean, do people? And so far, what we're seeing is people do not do that. People are not getting ready in front of their TVs at 5 p.m. to watch Boris Johnson update daily. I don't believe they're doing that.
Yeah, they're not recording podcasts on how to cope with corona anxiety. They're not doing anything.
No, not at all. Not at all. They're really not doing the most beneficial things for themselves. No, I will have to say I do find it. I think on the other point, I do find it just utterly fascinating. It's an invisible killer. It's something like, so I think we when we've spoken before, we've compared it to World War II, and this sort of idea, the fact that it's not humans on humans turning on each other makes it slightly more palatable. It makes us be able to unite around this, all of humanity unite around this one cause. I think that's also fascinating to see how, even though borders are shutting, there is this sort of increase in the sharing of information, despite what Donald Trump has been doing over the past week, which is disgusting.
And there's a, as you say, a collective unity, because ultimately it's not humans versus humans. Having said that, I think from a sort of anthropological perspective, it's very easy to other a human being rather than some sort of microscopic entity that we cannot see. It's very easy to make an enemy out of another human being because we interact with them all the time. We like some humans, we don't like some humans. There are qualities we like, qualities we don't like, that are easy to identify and point out because we deal with them on a daily basis. Whereas it's kind of sometimes quite difficult to, I think, rally everyone together in a form of like hatred against something. I'm not saying that hatred is necessarily the best motivator, but I don't necessarily think you can kind of conjure up emotion in the same way. having said that, obviously, I don't think we want to be operating on a politics of fear, but it does obviously help to go some way to, to kind of solving coordination problems and organizing social choice in a particular way.
Yeah. I think,
sorry, go on.
Referring back to what you said previously, our personal situations that we're in a student home, we're both living in our own respective university flats, unfortunately can't be together today for that reason. But due to that, we have a variety of different incentives within the household, all people perceiving what they hear on the news in different ways, and therefore behaving in different ways. So, for example, if people like us understand the severity of what's actually approaching this country, choose to stay within our households, we cannot prescribe that same behavior to the other people we live with, because we believe they are all autonomous humans of their own right and decide to have the ability to make their own decisions. So how have you coped with that sort of idea that, look, you may understand the gravity of this, but other people that you live with do not, and therefore you're under a threat. You are under a threat, especially if you're going to be in contact with with your family members. You are now under threat due to their behavior. How do you cope with that?
I mean, absolutely, it's a huge coordination problem more broadly, and I'm finding it very stressful. I'm sure I'm like lots of other people. I'm going home this weekend to see my family, and including that, my grandma, and I don't want to pass anything on to her. I'm sure lots of other people are in a very similar position to me, where they think, I want to go home and see my elderly relatives, but I'm scared because I might pass that on to someone else. So the way that I try to kind of get it across to people, there's the science and there's the maths, but I think ultimately you can only pitch to the head so much. In these situations, sometimes you need to pitch to the heart, because, or kind of frame it in a position that they can understand. And one of the ways that I've tried to persuade people is by saying, look, we're all interdependent on each other as a flat. There are 6 of us in my flat. We all have different views on how we should handle things, and have got different people in our lives that are coming in and whatsoever. I mean, my flatmate won't mind me saying that I had to have a really awkward conversation with her because her boyfriend works for Amazon, and he'd come in to stay the night, and he'd been doing deliveries that day. And I found that personally quite a sort of anxiety-inducing position, because I didn't want, for example, if someone's passing information, if they're signing pens with strangers, exchanging hands with, I didn't want that in my house, on my appliances, on my microwave, in my bathroom, on these different things. So I found that hard. But the way that I think you say it is, my family is your family. That's the way that you get it across. And you've got to think, if you're in the flat, and you wouldn't go out, let's say you're with your family, and you wouldn't go to a particular place because you thought, I don't want to infect my dad, let's say, or my grandma, then as a result of that, you think, well, I'm not going to go out, not only to protect my own grandparents, but to protect my flatmates' parents, my flatmates' grandparents that might have respiratory problems or be immunosuppressed in some way. And that's really difficult, because you firstly don't know a lot of these people. You've never met them before. You don't really owe anything to them. There's not really like a social contract of sorts. But that's a huge problem that I think we're facing.
I completely agree with that. I mean, I've had a similar, I think you have to have that conversation, just so there's this sort of awareness that this is ongoing. But also, I mean, I've had a different situation where people in my house do understand the gravity of the situation, and we've decided as a house to quarantine. But that also involves huge sacrifices, i.e. there's multiple people in my house who have, for example, starting new relationships, let's say, and now these people can no longer interact, because and that's quite a difficult decision for people in university to make, and for people who slightly don't understand that situation, that understand what situation is going on, that is too big of a lifestyle change for them to make. I kind of appreciate that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, hormonal uni students,
hormonal uni students, you don't want to.
And there's a big sort of end of the world, why not let's just kind of go for it sort of vibe that I think a lot of people
we're
have.
students and we're going to get it anyway because of herd immunity. So why not let's get it now? That sort of point of view, right? What would you hear? And it's like, well, that's all well and good, but can you guarantee that everyone you come in contact with are not going to be in contact with their elderly parents? Can you do that? I don't believe you can.
Yeah.
No.
So just kind of moving on to the sort of real ways that you're kind of entertaining yourself. Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you? I mean, there's a few things that I've noticed in particular. One is, as we've proven tonight, drinking in the house is now a massive motive.
Is now the one.
Yeah,
the one.
I mean, I'm sure it'll be interesting to see the kind of levels of alcoholism after this. Generally, data sets, economic data sets, going to be all over. Next sort of
elasticity graphs. That's all. They're finding a new.
No, but seriously, like, how are you? Like, what are you thinking of doing to kind of keep yourself sane?
See, I mean, of course, that's a very personal question because we'll each have our own sort of desires that we want to fulfill.
Give me a generalization. Give me some.
A generalization would be. I don't even know. Personally, I would say. So it looks like, I mean, just before filming this, it looks like most of the summer internships that let's say two of them are now off because of the COVID situation, and that people cannot guarantee that there won't be some sort of social distancing measures put in place during the summer, so they have to call them off. So, I mean, instantly that's one kind of option gone to sort of fill up my summer. But then, I mean, what are the next answers? I mean, I guess I'm starting a master's in September and October, so
where's that?
I can. No, I'm not going to do none of that. But the master's, so I'll probably read towards that and sort of improve my knowledge on that. Exercise more so. Luckily, the government advice says you can go out for exercise, you can go for runs. So I'm sure I'll be doing that to try and get some fresh air. I don't even know what else, Tom. What can you do in these hard times?
I mean, firstly this is another part of the current anxiety. I think as graduates, you're coming out into the labour market and things are looking very, very mysterious. As you said, there are internship opportunities that are falling through. Lots of people have been made redundant across the board or have had their kind of short-term contracts cut short because firms don't have the cash flow anymore to really kind of keep on interns and junior members of staff. So that's a real issue, and it's something that I think we need to rationalise as well. And try and work out how to get beyond. But I think a couple of things that I've been doing recently. I've been playing GeoGuessr. I went live and using your GeoGuessr details.
I love GeoGuessr.
Yeah, mate, it's so good. It's such a good game. I mean, for anyone, should we do a quick spark notes or primer even on GeoGuessr?
GeoGuessr is a game where you get dropped on Google Maps anywhere in the world, and you have to figure out where you are without looking at a map.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's pretty.
It's
awesome.
a great game.
It's exciting.
It's cultural understanding, fun, geographical knowledge, all kind of amalgamated. It's
an education. An education. Yeah.
It is.
And you even get a geography degree at the end of it when you finish.
BA though.
When you get enough points. Yeah. They'll have. I mean, to be fair, they'll get a degree. We won't, by the looks of things.
Yeah, so, they'll probably have a graduation picture, but we definitely.
I was thinking about that. All those people. I feel really bad for the people that want to get photos with their dissertation outside the department. It's like I'm going to risk going into campus, being out the economics building. I can totally imagine you taking that gamble. Like, you won't go out for like 2 weeks. You finish your dis. And then you'll go.
I 100% would take that gamble, but I have I saw on my Instagram. It was like on a Finsta, hilarious. Someone put they've already done it because obviously the restrictions hadn't applied like a week ago. So they've took the picture without the dis. So they're just going to Photoshop in the dis later on. I think that could be my objective.
That is
but
good.
No, I think something that we haven't actually touched on yet. So where I think both of us are certain type of people that, when an issue like this comes around, we want to know as much as possible so we can make the best possible judgment on the issue at hand. But there's others that, and I mean, I definitely live with a few, and I've been exposed to that sort of mindset through that, who, I mean, it's quite difficult to hear about this sort of news. I mean, it's so negative. Every time you open BBC News, it's basically either imperative telling you to stay in your bloody house, or and that's the sort of despair we are experiencing in reality. But to be reminded of that every second of the day by people like us who want to express that sort of information and to know the most that we possibly can be quite difficult. So do you feel like we have this sort of obligation to sort of censor ourselves, or to understand how this sort of can be anxiety inducing for a lot of people, and therefore to sort of, I don't know, sort of slightly decrease how much we touch on the matter, or do you think there's a balance to be had? I don't know.
Well, it depends who we are. If you're talking about just like us as human beings, that's one thing. If you're talking about media institutions, then that's another. But I think if you're talking about people that are just generally curious and wanting to know what's going on, people like us who don't necessarily have any media power necessarily. I mean, I do have like 800 followers on Twitter, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'm Rupert Murdoch by any means. But I think it's a question of, no, I think you should say stuff. You have a duty, I think, to inform your friends, because this is something that will inflict unnecessary suffering. And in my opinion, if you can do something that, prevents unnecessary suffering without, sacrificing anything of kind of comparable moral importance, then you should do it. The question is, it's about the messaging and how you do it is the real thing. So you can deliver information, I think, in a clear, calm way. You can say, look, the world isn't going to turn upside down completely. It's not going to end. But you need to be realistic with the prospects that we face. You need to say, we're going to have a global recession. This is going to happen. People are going to die. But if you take a series of steps and measures, which are sensible, then the risk can be mitigated massively. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable, thing to say. The question of, this is anxiety inducing for a lot of people. I mean, without getting too individualist, I think a lot of onus is on not just them, but also the kind of media institutions. I'm sure in the future we'll see, I'm sure in the next few weeks we'll see non-coronavirus like newsletters and non-coronavirus sort of news websites, because if you thought Brexit fatigue was bad, I think this is just going to absolutely take the legs off people here. Like, it's going to be absolutely terrible.
It's non-stop.
Yeah, it's non-stop. It's really overwhelming. So I do think that we'll get to a point where there'll be kind of non-coronavirus related news. It'll be like, in the Simpsons movie when they like put the dome over the top and everything's really bad, and then they're like, on the lighter side, and then they're talking about the Springfield Birds are returning to the there'll be some equivalent of that.
I also, I think what's also interesting is to think about how, again, I think this idea of the Overton window is always so fascinating. What's accepted in a political discussion. Today, Boris Johnson was asked, I'm not sure who by, but he was asked, how will this affect the Brexit negotiations? The transition period that's supposed to be ending by the end of this year, how would that affect that? And he pretty much just brushed it off. He said two things that no one's talking about.
Was it Beth Rigby? Sorry,
I think it might be Beth Rigby. I think it was Beth Rigby. I didn't want to say it though. That was one in my head.
He speaks like a bit like this.
It's like it did sound like that.
Man, I can't. Sorry, Sky, if I end up applying for your media grad scheme. Beth, I actually love you, and Sam Coates and all the rest of the Donnies. Niall. Yeah, see, I know your stuff, mate. Just hire me.
But he said one, no one's talking about in Downing Street right now, and two, it's already done. The legislation's there. It's going to happen. Which basically means is implicit acceptance that we're crashing out, that we're not going to have a deal in place by the end of the transition period, and that's not even breaking news. And Brexit was supposed to be the biggest thing, that this country cared about.
Good point.
But 2 weeks of a virus and no one gives a fuck. So look, that says enough.
Have a day off, Beth. Have a bloody day off.
Have a bloody day off. Have a bloody day off. But I do think it's momentous what he said, because it shows the kind of opinion he's going to take to this. Even though our time is taken up, we're not going to try and extend this period to get some sort of deal. It says a lot. But anyway,
But no, sorry, but kind of returning to the initial kind of how do we cope thing. Like, the problem is there's so much that people, I think we have all this time on our hands, and there's a lot of people saying, oh, you can like learn do all these new things and whatever. And like, yeah, I do think that's true. Like, there's time to do the things, but initially we need to think you're not going to be able to do any of that, to start new projects, to do some writing, to start a podcast, whatever, if you don't get your sort of welfare in check in the first place. That's really important. I found that, when I'm trying to write for my dissertation, for example, thinking what I'm writing about, I think is one of the most pressing like moral issues of our time. And even I'm struggling to sometimes think nothing else matters at this moment.
Nothing matters. Yeah.
And so it can get quite difficult. So I think that's just important to stress about the welfare side of things. But I think there's so much we can do now. I mean, I know I'm going home. I'm definitely going to like rediscover my love for my Xbox next weekend. Going to download some games. Like podcasts, I'm just smashing them out at the moment. Spicy Takes used to do like weekly podcast recommendations. I think I might kind of start getting back into that because I'm just like smashing out loads at the moment. Have you listened to The Athletics, by the way?
No, I haven't. I've definitely heard of it. But
so the Athletic do like loads of weekly pods for like big football teams. Guess what Chelsea's is called? Fran's a Chelsea fan for people.
Yeah, I am.
It's called Straight Outta Cobham.
Oh, see, that's very predictable actually now. I hear it.
Newcastle's is called Pod on the Tyne, which I kind of like.
I mean, I like that, but I don't think it's good as Straight Outta Cobham. Gotta say. So the podcasts are definitely one. I mean, I also really relate to what you're saying there with the whole. As soon as you start doing anything else, you inevitably start thinking about Corona. For example, the other day I was like, okay, I'm done with this. Like, I spent like the whole morning and the afternoon reading about Corona or watching Boris or reading the new report that came out, and I was like, okay, I'm actually done. So I tried to go on YouTube, tried to relax, tried to go on True Dawdy to watch some kickoff. No kickoff because there's no Premier League, so you got to accept that. And then I tried to go to Eddie Hearn to talk about boxing or IFL to see what he's the latest he's saying, and he's just talking about Corona because all his events are probably going to be cancelled because of it. So no matter what hobbies you have, it almost seems that you can't get away from it. So you have to go to something completely non-Corona related.
And I think that adds a whole new dimension to the way in which Netflix and chill could be a potential possibility. For those some desperate people out there that are really struggling with their lack of Tinder action, Netflix Party could be a way to revitalize their love life.
Yeah, a new MSN. Yeah, live our lives through the online.
But I think, maybe just to sort of wrap this up, because I think it's something that we need to appreciate as if constructively moving forward, but I don't think we should really dilute the gravity and magnitude of the situation here. So how do you think we sort of persuade people to be on side of us, to understand that this is a calamitous problem that's going to refashion the way in which we live for months to come in a way that doesn't, cause too much stress and anxiety, but gets the point across so that they change their behavior?
Mm-hmm. I think there's, I mean, I can speak from a personal point of view of what I'm going to do in my life. So I have very elderly grandparents returning from India within the next day or so, and I'm returning home within the next week or so. So I think the way I'm going to handle things is that I'm going to minimize my contact, if pretty much nothing at all. I'm not, unless it's to deliver food to them or necessary medication, I'm not going to be interacting with them unless literally through a door, for a post box. And I think that's my personal way of limiting my interaction. And personally, I'm going to be just staying at home because I have no reason. I don't rely on it for my rent or my mortgage. So I'm going to personally stay at home. And the reason for that is, look, if people get this virus, and it's so, I mean, look, the fatality rate is immensely low if you're under, I think, the age of 50 or so. The fatality rate is very low, but we are agents of transmission. We can spread this thing to people all around the country by the people we're in contact with at university. So I think my personal way is to isolate, to understand the facts, to look at how many people are affected by this, how debilitating it is, how we're not immune, how it's more fatal than a flu, how it spreads quicker than a flu, all these sort of factors, understanding those and to try and direct people to those sort of ideas so they can change their behavior. That's the way I'm looking at it. It's just try and relay the facts more than anything. What about you? How do we persuade people to our point of view?
It's tough, I mean, part of the problem is maybe people will only change their behavior when we're hurt, when somebody we know is infected, or somebody we know's relative passes away. And
I think
that's a really sad reflection. And sometimes the conclusion that I come to with these big mass catastrophes is, you don't really realize that it's a problem until it's too late. We've seen it with places like Mount Vesuvius and volcanic activity, where people are told, it'll be a problem, and then they go, it's all right. It's too much of a problem to ask us to evacuate the island, when they really should do, because the science is crystal clear, but they don't. And this could be the same with climate change. It could be the same with this. So it can be quite a sort of, I think, a difficult prospect to face, that actually maybe all our efforts might be for nothing. But I think a good way to persuade people is maybe making the most of local knowledge. This goes back to the anxiety thing. Sometimes people feel there's nothing I can do in this situation. And sometimes that can be overwhelming. Sometimes it can be liberating. But I think what we're finding online is there are lots of local community groups that are now organizing to combat this stuff. So, for example, in Newcastle, where I live, there is groups that are helping to organize, make sure that the elderly and the neediest are getting the sort of services they deserve. There's also a Warwick and Leamington one, which is obviously where we're studying. And I'm sure people back home, wherever you live, will have similar groups and pages popping up everywhere. And you could have an effect there. You really could, as young people. If you're someone that says and thinks, oh, we can't be affected, if that's your mindset, then what I'd say to you is, great, you can help, because you can go out and do things that the elderly can't. You can go and do things that maybe people more vulnerable are unable to do. So if you think you're invincible as you are, then bloody well use it. Make sure that you can provide for people that don't share the same kind of God-given powers that you think you've been blessed with. Age. But it's true. So I think that would be a good way. And the science absolutely is crystal clear. I mean, there's no way I would have been as onto this as quickly as I was, if it wasn't for the kinds of empiricists that I'm following. So there's a guy called Rob Wiblin, who is the director of 80,000 Hours, this sort of social impact group that I was talking about before. And he said probably about 2.5 weeks ago, there's a 20% chance that I'll get this. That's what he said. And at the time, people thought he was nuts. And when he said that, I knew in my head, because this guy, I agree with this guy on so many things. And I think the way that he views the world is so insightful. I thought that was the moment that my ears really pricked up. So I reckon that was probably about 2.5, 3 weeks ago. And probably, the likelihood it probably is about 20%. I wouldn't be surprised. There are people that we know in Leamington that have it. And there are people, so I think it's a real issue there. But I mean, my advice would be, though, for people, I think probably home's the best place, because you can't rely on your flat. And I don't mean that to diss my flatmates or anything, but coordinating amongst young people who are probably the most reckless of everyone is really hard. And sometimes if you feel like you've got to have an awkward conversation, have it. I feel like as young people, we feel too awkward to really approach these issues head on. And we need to make sure that we do that more. Yeah,
I totally agree. I think you have to face it head on. And if you back up your opinion with the facts, I mean, the facts, as you say, are crystal clear. I mean, we've said it many times. This will affect people we know. If the government's correct, this will spread far and wide, and if you don't eradicate it worldwide, it seems as if this thing will keep coming back. It seems as if you're not immune to it, you're going to get it at some point. If you're a youngster, if you're someone who can handle it, you are someone who should almost, in a way, should have it. You should contract this virus, and hopefully I saw on the press conference today they were talking about the availability of an antibody test. Do you have the antibody for the coronavirus? And therefore, have you had the coronavirus already? So when those tests started getting rolled out nationwide, we'll sort of be able to slowly adapt and understand more about the situation, how many people have actually had it already. So those sort of points of view, I would be looking at more and more, and I think we should. Yeah, I can't really reiterate more that if it's non-essential, then I don't see why you should be adding to the kind of transmission channels. I don't understand. Our fucking mere preferences, our motivations to go to a pub or to a party for one night more important than the people that would die if we pass it on to other students who would contract them? Is it more important? It's not more important. It's manifestly less important, and surely people will understand that. And as you said previously, people will only, I think it's sad to say, but people will only understand that far too late, when people in their lives have passed away or have been critically debilitated by the virus. And that saddens me, honestly. That's really awful. It's sad that people take so long.
It's awful, but I think there are some positive notes for reflection, in the sense that, I'm not sure if you read today, but China are testing for ways of treating the illness, and not via a vaccine, which is a different topic altogether. That I'm really interested in the public policy of vaccinations, and it's probably maybe something to touch on another episode, but not today. But the Japanese flu is being used as a way, or what the drugs that are used to treat Japanese flu are being used as ways to really effectively kind of curb the worst excesses of this illness. And it's something that is going to, as I've said before, be incredibly harmful, incredibly damaging to society, culture, the economy. But we will muddle through this. I do believe that. I have a lot of faith in our scientific community. I have a lot of faith in markets to respond to demand very quickly. I have a lot of faith in us as human beings to rally around the right causes when the going does get really tough. The fact that we've survived natural risks for so long, for 200,000 years as a species, I think tells something about the fact that this won't be the end. Because the longer that we tend to live, the longer, or the less the chance that these natural risks, these natural problems are to wipe us out, because they would have done before. The real problem is when it comes to technologically and biologically produced pandemics. That's a different question altogether, but maybe something we can kind of touch on in another podcast. But yeah, I think that's a kind of quite good way to wrap it up. I'm not sure if there's anything else that you want to add there, or if we can enjoy the remaining few days that we have where there aren't too many people we know with this virus, and hopefully we'll get this out before the country goes to the dogs entirely, and it still provides a perspective that people can reflect on properly.
Yeah, I think it's probably good to say that we're filming this at late on 18th March.
And then that's a good thing to say.
Because honestly, every day this is an evolving situation that seems to become exponentially worse each day.
Yeah, so, we'll pop it in the description at the start. The day. But yeah, I mean, apart from that, I think that's takes done for another day. And thanks for watching, guys. I'm sure you'll be after our sort of steely-eyed biological insights for future episodes. So yeah, and next time I promise I will bring a red stripe.
A red stripe
for the future. Yeah. All right.
Big
Cheers. Cheers. All right.
Okay,
we'll do
cheers,
cheers. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.